The endocrine system of the human body uses endocrine glands to produce and release hormones into our bloodstream as well as into our lymph system. Now, there are many examples of different endocrine glands in our body, and the first type of endocrine gland that we're going to discuss is the pituitary gland, also known as our hypophysis. Now, the pituitary gland can actually be broken down into two sections. We have the front portion, which is known as the anterior pituitary gland, and the back portion known as the posterior pituitary gland. In this lecture, we're going to focus on the anterior pituitary gland. Now, the anterior pituitary gland is actually controlled by a section of the forebrain known as our hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus actually controls the anterior pituitary gland by using its own set of hormones. And that's exactly why the hypothalamus is a gland of its own, because it releases and produces hormones. Now, in fact, the hypothalamus plays such an important role in the endocrine system, we call the hypothalamus the master gland of the endocrine system of the human body. So let's take a look at the following diagram. So we have the hypothalamus of the forebrain. We have the medium eminence, which is the bottom portion of the hypothalamus. And this is our pituitary gland, also known as the hypophysis. This is the front portion, the anterior pituitary gland, and the back portion, the posterior pituitary gland. Now, what exactly connects, what links the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary gland? Well, it's basically a network of blood vessels, a network of capillaries and veins and arteries that actually connects the hypothalamus to our anterior pituitary. And because the pituitary gland is also known as the hypophysis, this network of blood vessels is also known as the hypophyseal portal system. So basically, at the top portion of our blood vessel system, we have the superior hypophyseal artery. Superior simply means at the top, where this section is our inferior. So this is the superior. Hypophyseal basically means we're dealing with our hypophysis, our pituitary gland. And artery simply means it brings oxygenated blood and blood filled with nutrients to the hypothalamus of our body. So basically, this blood is carried into the medium eminence of the hypothalamus. It brings the oxygen and the nutrients to the hypothalamus. At the same time, the hypothalamus basically produces and releases the hormones into this network of capillaries. And then the hormone basically travels down into the portal veins through this region and into the capillaries found in the anterior pituitary gland. And we have many of these endocrine glands that can either be stimulated or inhibited by the hormone released by the hypothalamus. And that can basically release some type of hormone from the anterior pituitary gland into the blood vessel, the bloodstream of our body. So there are 6 different types of hormones that we should know when it comes to our anterior pituitary gland. So we have the human growth hormone, also known as simply the growth hormone. We have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. We have the thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. We have prolactin, and we also have the follicle-stimulating hormone and our luteinizing hormone. So let's go through each one of these hormones and discuss what their function is, and also let's discuss what the hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus is that controls each one of these anterior pituitary gland hormones. Now, the first thing that we should know about all these 6 hormones that are released by the anterior pituitary gland is they're all peptide hormones. That means they're formed in the rough endoplasmic reticulum of our endocrine cells. They are modified in the Golgi apparatus and they are released into our blood system. Now, once they're inside the blood, they are water soluble, and that means they do not need a carrier protein. And once they locate the target cells, these 6 proteins, these 6 hormones, all bind to receptor proteins found on the plasma membrane of the target cells. So because they can't actually pass across the cell membrane of the target cell, they have to bind to the surface of the plasma membrane of the target cells. So let's discuss each one of these hormones. Let's begin with the human growth hormone, also known as the growth hormone. So basically the hormone that is released by the hypothalamus that stimulates the release of the human growth hormone is known as the growth hormone releasing hormone, or GHRH. So GHRH is released by the hypothalamus. It travels down the portal veins into this capillary bed system that basically causes these endocrine cells to release our growth hormone. Now, the human growth hormone basically stimulates almost all the cells in our body, and what it does is the following. It basically causes the non-growing cells of the body to stop using glucose as the energy store, as the energy fuel, and it causes these cells to use fatty acids instead to basically create ATP. So that means the human growth hormone causes the liver to release our triglycerides, our fatty acids, from the liver cells into the bloodstream. Now, at the same time, it builds up our supply of glucose in the growing cells, such as muscle cells and our bone cells, and it causes these growing cells to basically grow in size because it increases the rate at which proteins are synthesized. It also increases certain cells, it increases the rate at which they undergo mitosis. So our human growth hormone builds up the supply of glucose so that cells can use that glucose to grow. It also causes the non-growing cells to increase the use of fatty acids and increases the size as well as the number of cells in our body. And it's controlled by the GHRH hormone released by the hypothalamus. Now let's move on to the second type of hormone that is released by the anterior pituitary gland, known as our adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. Now, the hormone that is released by the hypothalamus that stimulates the release of ACTH from the anterior pituitary gland is known as the corticotropin releasing factor, or CTF. Now, ACTH is released from the anterior pituitary gland at times of stress, and it basically carries that hormone via the bloodstream into another endocrine gland in the body known as our adrenal cortex. And ACTH causes our adrenal cortex to basically release a group of hormones known as glucocorticoids via a secondary messenger system. And we'll discuss these in more detail when we'll focus on the adrenal cortex. Now, the third type of hormone is our thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. And the hormone that is released by the hypothalamus that stimulates the release of TSH is known as thyroid-releasing hormone. So, the hypothalamus releases the thyroid-releasing hormone, and it travels down the portal veins into this system, and that stimulates the release of our thyroid-stimulating hormone. Now, TSH, the thyroid-stimulating hormone, basically stimulates, it causes the thyroid cells in our thyroid to not only increase in number, but also increase in size. And this increases the rate at which those thyroid cells basically produce two important types of hormones known as T3 and T4, and we'll discuss what these actually do when we'll look at the thyroid individually. So the one thing we have to know about this cycle is our TRH, the thyroid releasing hormone, basically affects the anterior pituitary in a positive manner. So this is positive this is a positive feedback cycle, and this is also a positive feedback cycle. That basically means this buildup in concentration causes this to build up in concentration, and that causes our thyroid to basically increase the concentration of T3 and T4. But T3 and T4, as this builds up in its concentration, it creates a negative feedback loop in terms of the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. So the buildup in this causes our anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus to stop producing our TRH and the TSH. Now, the next hormone that is produced by the anterior pituitary gland is our prolactin. So prolactin is basically stimulated, or actually it's not stimulated. So the interesting thing about prolactin is the hormone that is produced by the hypothalamus, known as the prolactin inhibitory hormone, actually inhibits the release of prolactin. And this is the only hormone that basically does this. All these other hormones are stimulated by the hypothalamus hormone, but prolactin is inhibited by the release of our prolactin inhibitory hormone. So the hypothalamus releases the prolactin inhibitory hormone, or PIF, PIH. This hormone basically can be replaced with factor. So we have prolactin inhibitory factor. That's why this is also known as PIF. And this actually doesn't stimulate, it inhibits the release of prolactin. Now, as we'll see in the next several lectures, prolactin is involved in enabling milk production in females, among other things. It basically it basically allows the process of lactation to actually take place. Now, the fifth and the sixth hormone is the follicle-stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. And both of these hormones are involved in the reproductive cycle of the human organism. And we'll discuss their roles in more detail when we'll discuss the reproduction cycle. For now, we're going to just say that our follicle-stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone are both stimulated by the gonadotropin release hormone GnRH that is produced by our hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus releases our gonadotropin releasing hormone, and it travels down to the endocrine cells, and it causes the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, the luteinizing hormone. Now, the follicle stimulating hormone basically causes the production and the maturation of the follicle in females. At the same time, it stimulates the production of sperm cells in males. While the luteinizing hormone basically causes our ovulation cycle to take place in females, and it causes our males to basically produce our hormone known as testosterone. So we'll discuss these in much more detail when we'll focus on the reproductive cycle of the human organism.